Welcome to West Film, where every movie has a story worth telling. From heart-pounding action to twisty mysteries and dramas that stick with you, we dig into the plot, the characters, and the moments that make each film worth your time. So grab a seat, get comfortable, and let's jump into today's movie. This is West Film. Your story starts here. Eventually, the drunken Santa pushes himself off his bar stool and heads for a door leading up to the rooftop. Before he goes, though, he hands the bartender a wrapped gift and tells her it's meant for her grandson, which throws her completely, since she's certain she never mentioned her family, let alone her grandson's name, to this stranger. A beat later, she notices he's walking toward what looks like the wrong exit, so she trails him upstairs. By the time she reaches the roof, he's nowhere to be found. She's still scanning the rooftop in confusion when she happens to glance up and spots an actual sleigh soaring off into the night sky. She stands there stunned, slowly putting together that the sloppy drunk from the bar might have been the real Santa Claus all along. The moment doesn't stay magical for long, though. All that alcohol catches up with Santa, and he throws up from the sleigh, landing squarely on the poor bartender below. From there, the story jumps across the ocean to Greenwich, Connecticut. Jason Lightstone is waiting on his estranged wife, Linda, to pick him up. Their marriage is clearly on the rocks, but they're both making an effort to hold things together for the holidays, at least for appearances' sake. When Linda pulls up with their young daughter Trudy, Jason greets them warmly and thanks Linda for agreeing to join him at his mother's estate, even though neither of them is thrilled about the family gathering ahead. The three of them drive up to the sprawling Lightstone property, where a guard at the gate recognizes the car and waves them through. Inside, the mansion is buzzing with last-minute Christmas preparations, staff rushing around to get everything ready before the family fully assembles. That evening, Jason, Linda, and Trudy walk into the main living room, where Jason's sister Alva is already waiting alongside her son Brett and her boyfriend. There's an obvious rivalry simmering between the siblings. The moment word comes that their mother is on her way, Alva bolts toward the entrance with her family in tow, determined to be first in line to greet her, and she clocks the fact that Jason is hanging back, which immediately makes her suspicious. She presses him on what he's up to, convinced he's got some ulterior motive, and her boyfriend chimes in, agreeing that Jason must be angling for something. Eventually the group drifts to the back of the room where Jason and Linda are standing. After dinner wraps up, everyone heads off to bed. Jason and Linda take Trudy upstairs and tuck her in, and while they're settling her down, she reminds her dad that he never took her to see Santa at the mall, so she never got the chance to tell him what she wants for Christmas. Jason feels instantly guilty. To make it up to her, he lets her open one gift early, a walkie-talkie, which he tells her has a special line straight to Santa. If she talks into it, he explains, Santa will hear her wish loud and clear. Trudy buys it completely. Once her parents leave the room, she picks up the walkie-talkie and, instead of asking for toys or gadgets, makes a much simpler wish. She just wants her mom and dad to fall back in love and be a family again. Meanwhile, the real Santa is still out making his rounds, growing more intoxicated with every stop. Eventually his route brings him to the Lightstone estate. He wanders in, spots the cookies Trudy left out, helps himself, and then stumbles onto a bottle of booze he decides to take too. Rather than getting straight back to work, he flops into a massage chair for a breather. What he doesn't know is that something much more dangerous is already brewing inside the house. One of the estate's security guards slips into the control room and, instead of relieving his colleague, knocks him out cold because he's actually part of a criminal crew working the job. With the security room now under their control, he radios the rest of the team to signal that the heist is on. Outside, another member of the crew, a man calling himself Mr. Scrooge, pulls up to the gate. He tells the guard he's got a flat tire and asks for a hand, and once the guard turns his back to help, Scrooge shoots him dead on the spot. clearing the way for the rest of his men to storm the property. Scrooge's team moves fast and brutal, taking out guards and staff before anyone can mount a real defense. Jason's mother is rushed toward the panic room by her bodyguards, and for a moment it looks like she might actually make it until Scrooge appears inside the room himself, kills her guards, and takes control. He then rounds up the rest of the family. Brett, Alva, her boyfriend, and Jason's mother are all taken hostage as the mercenaries lock down the mansion. While all this is happening, Jason and Linda are elsewhere in the house, deep in a tense conversation about their marriage. Linda finally lays it all out as she feels like he's checked out, not paying enough attention to Trudy, and she blames a lot of their strain on his overbearing, controlling mother. Jason tries to keep things from boiling over, insisting he genuinely wants to fix things between them and that the family fortune matters far less to him than she thinks. He even says he'd walk away from the Lightstone Company and the money entirely if it meant saving their relationship. Their conversation gets cut short by the sound of gunfire ringing through the house. Santa hears it too. Realizing something's badly wrong, he decides sticking around is a bad idea and tries to make his exit, tapping his nose to trigger his usual chimney teleporting trick. Nothing happens. He tries again, still nothing. Turns out being blackout drunk really messes with his magic. Meanwhile, the family's been herded into the living room. As Santa hunts for another way out, one of Scrooge's men stumbles across him, clearly not expecting to run into the actual Santa Claus mid-heist, but there's no time to process that. A fight breaks out, and though Santa struggles at first, he eventually gets the upper hand and sends the guy flying through a window. Back in the living room, Jason's mother tries to rattle Scrooge by revealing she's got a private extraction team already en route. He's on with the day he already knows about them, down to their arrival time. Then he drops something even bigger. He knows there's roughly $30 million sitting in a vault somewhere on the property. She insists the vault is unbreakable, but Scrooge proves he's done his homework, rattling off details about the security system and even mentioning the remote she keeps that can reconfigure the vault's lock. He takes it from her before she can react, then orders his crew to start cracking the vault. Soon after, one of the mercenaries reports that a teammate has gone silent, which sets off alarm bells. Scrooge tells his people to sweep the estate for anyone who might have slipped away during the initial takeover. Santa, meanwhile, sneaks back inside through another door. With armed men controlling the mansion, he tries the house phone to call for help, only to find the lines already cut. Before he can figure out a plan B, he hears footsteps and ducks behind a pillar. He starts rummaging through his sack, hoping for something useful, but of course it's stuffed with presents, not weapons. When a mercenary wanders in to search the room, Santa finally pulls out a dolly. Not exactly ideal, but it'll do. He waits for his moment, then clocks the guy from behind hard enough to knock the gun from his hand. Unfortunately, the mercenary's still very much alive and pulls a knife. Santa digs back into the sack and comes up with a hockey stick this time, landing another solid hit. For a second it looks like he's winning, but the mercenary claws back the advantage and the fight turns brutal. Somewhere in the struggle, something instinctive kicks in, and Santa ultimately kills him. In the living room, Linda tries to keep Trudy calm, having her lie down close by. Trudy's still got the walkie-talkie, and believing she can reach Santa through it, she quietly switches it on and starts calling out. At almost the exact same moment, Santa finds the dead mercenary's radio and, flipping through the channels, hears her voice come through. He answers, asking where she is and what's going on. She tells him she's stuck in the living room, surrounded by armed men, and Santa immediately understands how serious things have gotten. He tells her to stay calm, he's coming to help. Determined to find another way to call for backup, Santa heads for the gatehouse, only to discover the phones there are dead too. Then he catches Scrooge's voice over the mercenary radio, trying to reach the guy Santa just killed. Santa answers instead, bluntly informing Scrooge that his men is dead and warns him that if he and his crew don't leave the family alone, Santa's coming for them next. Furious, Scrooge storms back into the living room demanding to know who the Lightstones hired to play Santa. Jason's mother swears nobody hired anyone. There's not supposed to be a Santa here at all. Scrooge doesn't buy it, convinced this mystery man must be part of some hidden security plan, and starts pressuring the family for answers. He grabs a decorative nutcracker and uses it to break one of Jason's fingers, threatening to keep going until someone tells him who this Santa really is. Watching her father get hurt, Trudy panics and warns Scrooge that Santa is going to make him pay. Linda tries to cover by saying Trudy's just playing pretend, but Trudy won't back down. She insists Santa is real and that she's been talking to him on the walkie-talkie the whole time. Realizing his daughter's belief could put a target on her, Jason blurts out something he never wanted to say: Santa isn't real. It crushes her. Devastated and confused, she bolts from the room and hides up in the attic, hoping the gunman won't find her. Around this time, Santa finally gets a second to check his wounds and realizes he's bleeding badly. He stitches himself up as best he can, but he's already lost too much blood, and he blacks out. In the darkness, he has a strange vision of himself, not the jolly gift giver everyone knows, but a hardened warrior from some far darker chapter of his past, hinting that long before the red suit and the sleigh, Santa was somebody else entirely. Then Trudy's voice comes through the radio and pulls him back to consciousness. She asks him point blank, is he really Santa Claus? He confirms it, but he's honest with her too. Being Santa doesn't mean he can wave a wand and fix everyone's problems. He can't magically make her parents fall back in love just because she wished for it. That's not the kind of magic he controls. Back downstairs, one of the mercenaries forces the family to open their Christmas presents on camera, turning their own holiday into a humiliating spectacle. When it's Jason's turn, he claims to have forgotten his gift, but Brett spots a box under the tree and hands it to their grandmother before Jason can stop him. She opens it to find not a present, but a handwritten note, and whatever it says clearly rattles her. She keeps the contents to herself and won't explain. Elsewhere, Trudy keeps chatting with Santa, curious about everything that's happened. He finally opens up about his past. Long before he was delivering toys, he was a warrior, not a gentle one. He fought with a massive hammer and admits he actually enjoyed the violence, killing enemies without a second thought. Looking back, he jokes he probably would have topped his own naughty list. Trudy doesn't judge him for it, as she tells him that whatever he did back then, he's helping people now, and that's what matters. Her words clearly land with him. For a guy who started the night questioning whether Christmas meant anything anymore, her unwavering faith gives him a reason to keep fighting. He tells her to stay hidden and promises he'll handle the men in the house. Around the same time, Scrooge gets word that the extraction team is nearly at the estate. Santa sets off again, hunting for another mercenary, but accidentally sets off one of the kids' toys while sneaking through a room, giving away his position. He ducks into another room to hide, but Scrooge tracks him down and forces the door open. Santa's overwhelmed and taken captive. While questioning him, the mercenaries find his massive sack, which looks nearly empty at first, but every time they reach in, another gift comes out, endlessly. Confused by the impossible bag, they can't make sense of it, but Scrooge refuses to entertain the idea that this could actually be Santa. To destroy whatever trick he thinks is going on, he chucks the magical sack into the fireplace, and Santa can only watch as it burns. Scrooge then explains his grudge against Christmas. As a 10-year-old, he broke into a neighbor's house on Christmas to steal presents and accidentally startled the family's grandfather, who fell down the stairs and died. He's blamed Santa for it ever since. On some level, Santa listens but doesn't budge. He delivers presents, he says, not fate. He doesn't control what people choose to do, and what happened that night wasn't on him. Scrooge isn't comforted by any of it. Before things can escalate further, Trudy makes her move. Still hiding in the mansion, she dumps a mountain of styrofoam packing peanuts into the ventilation system, sending them spilling through the house and drawing the mercenaries' attention away from Santa. In the chaos, he finally gets his shot. He taps his nose again, and this time the magic works. He vanishes and reappears on the roof. For a moment it seems like he's actually escaped. Then he spots vehicles pulling up to the estate. The extraction team has arrived. He initially assumes they're there to save the family, but something feels off. He checks his magical list and finds every one of their names marked naughty. That's when it clicks. The so-called rescue team is actually working with Scrooge. They spot him almost immediately and open fire. Santa dodges the bullets and retreats into a nearby warehouse, exhausted, wounded, and about as low as he's been all night. His sack is destroyed, the house is crawling with armed men, and even the supposed rescuers have betrayed the family. For a second, he's ready to give up. Then Trudy's voice comes through the radio again, telling him maybe he could use a Christmas miracle of his own. Something about that makes him look around, and he spots a hammer lying nearby. It takes him straight back to the warrior he used to be, and he picks it up. This isn't just any weapon, it's a callback to the fighter he once was. The exhausted, defeated Santa from earlier is gone, replaced by something much older and more dangerous. He charges the extraction team and tears through them one by one, all that buried combat instinct roaring back to life, and by the time he's done, most of the elite soldiers are finished. While Santa's outside fighting, Scrooge's crew finally cracks the vault, only to find it completely empty. No money. Scrooge explodes, storming back to the hostages demanding answers, and Jason finally admits the truth. He stole the $30 million himself. His plan had been to use it to break free from his mother's grip and start a real life with Linda and Trudy, away from the Lightstone Empire entirely. Meanwhile, two mercenaries track Trudy down in the attic. She radios Santa to warn him they've found her, but she's not exactly defenseless. Inspired by Home Alone, she's rigged the attic with homemade traps, and the two men walk straight into them, getting thoroughly wrecked despite expecting an easy grab. Downstairs, the rest of the family starts fighting back to Linda, Brett, and Alva jump a mercenary and overpower him. For the first time all night, the Lightstones stop being passive hostages and start defending themselves. Santa and Trudy reunite shortly after, but Jason's still in danger. The surviving extraction team members have dragged him outside to force him into revealing where he hid the money. Santa, Trudy, and the family head out to save him, and another brutal fight breaks out. Linda joins in to protect Jason, and together with Santa's help, they take down most of what's left of the extraction crew. In the chaos, Scrooge slips away. Santa spots him fleeing and gives chase, and the pursuit leads to one final, brutal showdown between the two men, both already battered and running on fumes, neither willing to back down. Realizing brute strength alone might not cut it, Santa reaches for the one card Scrooge could never see coming: real Christmas magic. Mid-fight, he grabs onto Scrooge and activates his teleportation, yanking them both up through the chimney and onto the roof in one violent burst. Scrooge doesn't survive the trip, but the toll on Santa is just as steep. Already critically wounded, he collapses the moment it's over. When Trudy and the others reach him, he looks dead. She refuses to accept it, convinced that his magic runs on people's belief in him. So she asks everyone gathered around to say out loud that Santa is real. One by one, the Lightstones do. Even the adults who'd long since written him off as a childhood fantasy admit that the man in front of them really is Santa Claus. Nothing happens for a few agonizing seconds. Then he wakes up. Their belief, and Trudy's above all, has brought him back. The night's changed him. He started it exhausted, drunk, and ready to walk away from Christmas altogether, convinced nobody cared what it stood for anymore. But after everything with Trudy, her unshakable faith in family, in generosity, in him, he's found his purpose again. As the dust settles, the jingle of reindeer bells signals his sleigh arriving at the estate, and waiting there is one last surprise. Since his original sack burned in the fireplace, His wife has sent a brand new one along with the sleigh. Spirit restored, Santa climbs aboard and gets back to delivering presents. What really makes Violent Night work is that it never treats Santa Claus as a one-joke premise. Going in, that's exactly what I expected: a David Harbour stumbling around drunk, sick of Christmas, griping about kids and consumerism. Classic angry Santa. Basically bad Santa with a body count. But the film gives him more depth than that setup suggests. This Santa isn't just cranky for laughs, say he's genuinely worn down. Not the fake, sitcom kind of tired, either. He plays like someone who's done the same job for centuries and slowly watched its meaning drain away. Everyone wants more stuff, the newest gadget, and nobody seems grateful anymore. And he's hit the point where Christmas means less to him than it does to practically anyone else. That gives Harbour something to actually play beyond drunk one-liners and fight choreography. He's irritable, messy, a little pathetic, but there's an undercurrent of someone who misses believing in what he does. He hasn't stopped caring entirely, he's just lost track of why he should. Then the film reveals Santa's got history. And not the cookie and milk kind. Before he became Santa, he was apparently a warrior known as Nicholas the Red, and suddenly the whole concept clicks into place. He's not randomly turned into an action hero because the script demands it. The capacity for violence was already buried inside him, and the home invasion just drags it back to the surface. That's probably my favorite idea in the whole movie. This guy in the red suit hauling around presents used to solve his problems with a massive hammer. It's absurd, but the good kind of absurd. The film is also smart enough not to over-explain everything. Santa has genuine magic, things that shouldn't be possible by any normal logic: the reindeer, the sack, the chimney trick, all the classic mythology. But even he doesn't fully understand how it works. And there's something funny about a magical character basically shrugging and admitting he doesn't have all the answers either. That detail keeps the movie from getting bogged down trying to build out rules and lore. Christmas magic exists, that's the deal, now move on. Although, honestly, I wanted more of it. That's one of the missed opportunities here. If you're committing to a Viking Santa with supernatural powers, lean further into it. Give him more Christmas-specific tricks, weirder tools, more ways of turning the mythology into action movie weaponry. The film gets there occasionally, but you can sense how much further this idea could have gone. Still, the key thing is that Santa never becomes a gimmick. His bond with Trudy is what gives him a reason to care about more than just surviving the night. She keeps believing in him even when he's barely holding on to belief in himself. And yes, that occasionally tips into sentimentality, but it also gives the character an actual arc. He starts the film wanting Christmas to just be over. By the time everything's fallen apart, he's fighting for the very thing he thought he'd stopped caring about, not just the family, not even just Trudy, but the idea that Christmas still means something. And that's exactly why the arc works better than it has any right to. On paper, drunk Santa remembers he used to be a Viking and starts killing mercenaries sounds like a 10-minute sketch that gets sold fast. But Harbour brings enough exhaustion, frustration, and genuine warmth to the role that Santa starts to feel like a real person inside this completely ridiculous premise. He's still crude, violent, and drinking throughout. He never flips into the traditional cheerful Santa, and that restraint matters. The movie lets him rediscover a bit of his old spirit without fundamentally changing who this version of the character is. He stays rough around the edges right up to the end, which keeps the redemption from feeling manufactured. So honestly, the biggest surprise in Violent Night isn't the violence, and it's not Santa swinging a hammer, it's that this deliberately ridiculous take on the character actually earns a character arc I bought into. Without that, I don't think the rest of the film holds together nearly as well. If they'd cast the wrong actor as Santa, this whole thing probably falls apart. That might sound obvious, but think about what the role actually demands. Someone who can look completely wiped out, sell the comedy, handle the physical action, and still make the quieter emotional beats land without tipping into parody. Somehow, David Harbour pulls off all of it. He looks like he's been doing this job for centuries and is thoroughly sick of it, and that reads instantly. There's a heaviness to him that suits this version of Santa perfectly. He's not graceful, not some polished action hero. He looks tired. He gets hurt. He gets frustrated. And when he starts fighting back, it feels messy and physical rather than slick and choreographed to death. Harbour also gets the joke without constantly winking at it. He doesn't spend the whole runtime nudging the audience with "Can you believe Santa's doing this?" He plays it mostly straight. Yes, he's drunk, he swears, he beats people to death, but underneath all that, Harbour gives Santa a genuine sadness that makes him more compelling than the concept probably deserves. And when the fighting kicks in, his physical presence sells it. He looks believable swinging a hammer, believable getting thrown through furniture. There's real weight to the fights, and he never seems to be faking toughness the film doesn't actually need from him. For me, he's easily the film's center. Trudy, though, is probably the character that splits audiences the most. She's the kid who still genuinely believes in Santa, and that belief becomes his emotional lifeline through the whole ordeal. The walkie-talkie device is a smart choice. It lets the two of them build a relationship without needing to share every scene together. And Leah Brady sells it with real sincerity, which matters, because Santa needs at least one person in this story who still sees him as Santa rather than a bloodied drunk. That said, I get why some viewers find Trudy a bit much. There are stretches where the film swings from brutal violence straight into soft Christmas sentiment, and she's usually right at the center of that pivot. Sometimes it lands. Sometimes it feels like you flip the channel to a totally different holiday movie. Depending on your patience for that kind of tonal whiplash, she's either the emotional heart of the story or the point where things get too saccharine. I land somewhere in the middle. I think the character's necessary, since without her Santa doesn't have much reason to change, but there are moments where the film pushes the sweetness harder than it needs to. Then there's John Leguizamo as Scrooge, clearly having a blast. The character's built entirely around hating Christmas, and Leguizamo brings enough energy that he doesn't get swallowed up by all the Santa mythology around him. He's loud, aggressive, bitter, and completely in on the tone of the movie. Is he an all-time great villain? Probably not, and that's a fair criticism. He's entertaining, but a lot of what makes him work is Leguizamo himself. On paper the character can read as a fairly generic violent criminal with a Christmas-shaped grudge. Still, Leguizamo gives him personality, and in a movie like this, that goes a long way. Beverly D'Angelo is also a lot of fun as Gertrude, cold, powerful, rude, and completely at ease, treating her own family like they're all competing for her approval. There's something almost impressive about how unpleasant she manages to be. She barely reacts to armed criminals the way a normal person would, which tells you everything you need to know about her character. The rest of the Lightstone family exists largely to generate chaos around her. Cam Gigant gets some solid material as a deliberate riff on the macho action star archetype, playing that exaggerated bravado just broadly enough that the joke lands without needing spelled out. Alexis Louder, Alex Hassell, Eda Patterson, and the rest of the ensemble all get their moments too. But the family's meant to be intentionally grating. That's part of the joke, though it also means you're spending a lot of time with people you're not necessarily rooting for. Some viewers will love how awful they are, others will keep wondering why Santa's risking his neck for half of them. Fair question, honestly. The performances mostly keep those scenes lively, but whenever Harbour steps off screen for too long, you can feel the energy dip. That's how you know how much he's carrying. The supporting cast is solid, Leguizamo's entertaining, D'Angelo commits fully, and Trudy gives the story its emotional core. But Harbour is the one holding all these different tones together. He's the reason the comedy lands, the reason the action works, and surprisingly, the reason the sentimental stuff doesn't completely collapse in something this ridiculous. That's about the highest compliment I can give him. The actual home invasion setup here is pretty straightforward. An absurdly wealthy family gathers for Christmas. Nobody's particularly thrilled to be there, and most of them are quietly, or not so quietly, angling to stay in Gertrude's good graces because of her money. So the house already feels tense before the criminals even show up. Gertrude is the gravitational center of the whole family. She's got the money, the power, the influence, and everyone around her knows it, which you can feel in nearly every interaction. The family isn't just celebrating Christmas together, they're performing for her, and that generates a decent amount of comedy since they're selfish, petty, competitive, and often flat-out obnoxious. The problem is the film keeps hammering that point home well past when you've already gotten it. These are wealthy people who mostly can't stand each other, and you don't need another scene to prove it. Jason and Linda at least give the story some emotional grounding, since their marriage is already crumbling and Trudy's caught in the middle, giving the film something more personal beyond everyone chasing Gertrude's approval. But the lights tones are, by design, hard people to root for, which creates an odd dynamic once the robbery kicks off. You're watching Santa risk his life for a family where, outside Trudy and maybe one or two others, you're not exactly begging for their survival. I think the movie's aware of that. The unpleasantness is baked into the joke. Then Scrooge and his crew show up hunting for the money hidden in the vault, and the film shifts into full die-hard mode. The mercenaries take the estate, wipe out security, lock the family down, and figure the night's under control. Except Santa's still loose inside the house. That's the whole engine of the movie right there. What I appreciate is that Santa doesn't immediately volunteer to be the hero. He wants out. His reindeer are gone, people are shooting at him, and he's got zero emotional stake in this rich family. His first instinct is basically not my problem, which tracks for this version of the character. It's Trudy who flips that switch. Once he realizes she's trapped and genuinely believes he can save her, his role in the story starts to shift, and suddenly the drunk guy trying to sneak out becomes the one wild card the criminals never accounted for. Scrooge himself is fun mostly because Leguizamo brings so much energy to him. His personal hatred of Christmas fits the tone, and the whole Mr. Scrooge bit is exactly as unsubtle as you'd expect, which is fine, since this isn't a subtle movie to begin with. But the villains do have an odd inconsistency problem. They're introduced as highly trained professionals, yet once Santa starts moving through the house, several of them turn out to be surprisingly easy to outmaneuver. There are stretches where you start questioning how competent they're actually supposed to be, especially since the film wants them to register as genuinely dangerous early on. It doesn't derail anything, but it's noticeable. And then there's the broader structure, which is where Violent Night feels most familiar. Strip Santa out of the equation and you're left with a fairly standard wealthy family hostage thriller. Criminals invade, there's money in the vault, betrayals surface, outsiders might or might not be trustworthy, the family has its own baggage, secrets come spilling out eventually. We've seen this shape plenty of times before, so the Santa angle is doing a lot of heavy lifting. Thankfully, it's a strong enough hook to carry most of it, because every time the story threatens to feel too familiar, Santa reappears and suddenly you're watching a Christmas icon creeping through a mansion trying to figure out how to take down armed mercenaries, which completely changes the flavor. The weaker stretches are usually the ones spent away from him. Family arguments that drag, predictable hostage beats, an emotional reconciliation arc that heads exactly where you expect. But once the invasion plot and Santa's presence start feeding off each other, that's when the film finds its personality. It's not that the story is especially original, it isn't, but there's real fun in taking a thoroughly familiar action movie framework and dropping the actual Santa Claus into the middle of it. And somehow that alone makes the well-worn parts feel a lot more entertaining than they'd otherwise be. If there's one area where Violent Night knows exactly what its audience showed up for, it's the action. The appeal's right there in the title. Nobody's watching this to see Santa politely negotiate with armed mercenaries. You want to see what happens when the guy who normally hauls around a sack of toys starts reaching for whatever sharp, heavy, or festively inappropriate object is closest at hand, and the film has a genuine blast with that premise. The best set pieces aren't violent just for the sake of it, they lean into the Christmas setting itself, which is what gives them their personality. Candy canes become weapons, Christmas lights become part of a kill, ice skates get involved, and decorations that should be totally harmless suddenly turn dangerous. There's something wonderfully stupid about watching Santa scan a room full of ornaments and mentally convert it into an arsenal. It works precisely because the violence keeps clashing against everything we associate with Santa Claus, the warm, comforting guy who leaves gifts under the tree, here smashing someone with a hammer. That contrast never really stops being funny. David Harbour sells the physical side of it too, because the fights never make Santa look invincible. He takes hits, gets worn down, stumbles around, occasionally looks like he's figuring things out in real time, and then that old warrior instinct kicks back in, and the action turns considerably more aggressive. The hammer sequences are probably the clearest example. Once he's got something in hand that connects back to who he used to be, the movie almost lets him transform into a different person for a few minutes, and there's a real sense that underneath the beard and the red suit, this guy genuinely knows how to hurt people. Some of the hits land pretty nasty, and the film gets surprisingly graphic overall. People are shot, stabbed, impaled, crushed, and there's blood everywhere. Bodies take damage in ways that make it very clear this was never meant to double as a family Christmas movie, Santa's presence notwithstanding. What I do appreciate is that the gore usually comes with some kind of punchline attached, not always a literal joke, but a visual absurdity of some sort. A brutal kill hits differently when Christmas lights or a sharpened candy cane are involved, and the movie's most inventive when it's hunting for ways to twist cheerful holiday imagery into something horribly wrong. There's also that Home Alone-style stretch where the film essentially asks, what if those traps had actually done real damage? And yes, people get completely wrecked. The movie clearly understands why that's funny. That said, for a movie literally called Violent Night, I get the criticism that it could have pushed even further. Some scenes feel oddly restrained, the lighting occasionally hides the full impact of a hit, and the editing sometimes cuts away right when you'd expect the film to fully commit to the gore. That won't bother everyone, there's still plenty of blood on display, but if you walked in expecting non-stop splatter from start to finish, you might come away feeling like the movie pulls back right when it should be leaning in harder. The same applies to the overall amount of action. When the fights happen, they're genuinely good, with clear, legible choreography and physicality from Harbour that lets you actually follow what's happening without the camera shaking itself apart. I appreciated that. Too many modern action films manage to make a single punch look like someone threw the camera down a flight of stairs. Violent Night is generally much cleaner. There are wide shots, coherent geography within the fights, and the film actually lets you watch the performers move. Nowhere near John Wick levels of precision, but it clearly benefits from that same modern approach to action filmmaking where the choreography matters and the audience is allowed to see it. The stunt work holds up well too. Hits have real weight, people crash through furniture, and you can feel the physical mess of it all. Because Santa isn't moving like a trained assassin, the fights have a scrappy quality that fits him perfectly. He's strong, he's experienced, but he's also drunk, irritated, and probably wondering how his Christmas Eve spiraled into this. The effects are a bit more uneven. Some of the practical gore looks great and appropriately gross, but the digital blood is hit or miss, and once you clock a shot where extra splatter's clearly been layered in afterward, it does chip away at the impact a little. Even so, most of the violence lands because the underlying ideas are strong enough to carry it, and honestly, I'd rather watch an imperfectly executed action scene built around a ridiculous Christmas premise than another generic shootout in a grey hallway. That's the movie's real advantage. Even when the execution isn't flawless, it almost always has an identity. My bigger complaint is that there are stretches where you're just waiting for the next fight. The film spends a fair amount of time on family drama, the hostage situation, and the sentimental material, and depending on your patience, you may start getting restless. Because once Santa starts wrecking people, that's the film at its most alive. The humor sharpens, the pacing picks up, and you remember exactly why this premise sounded so fun in the first place. The soundtrack helps a lot too. There's something beautifully wrong about hand-to-hand violence playing out under cheerful Christmas music. That contrast is doing half the comedic work on its own. Someone's getting absolutely destroyed while the movie keeps insisting this is technically the most wonderful time of the year. That's Violent Night in a nutshell. It takes all the visual language of Christmas, lights, decorations, music, candy, Santa himself, and runs it through an action movie filter. Sometimes it's genuinely creative, sometimes it's just plain ridiculous. And most of the time it's honestly both. That's exactly why the action works as well as it does. You'll find better choreography elsewhere, nastier gore elsewhere, more sophisticated action filmmaking elsewhere. But there aren't many other movies where Santa Claus can beat someone senseless with a Christmas decoration and somehow make it feel completely earned. That particular corner of the market belongs entirely to Violent Night. One of the strangest things about this movie is that I still can't quite pin down its genre. From a distance it reads as horror. There's gore, brutal kills, torture, and Santa spends a good chunk of the runtime drenched in blood. But calling it a horror film doesn't quite fit either. It's closer to an action comedy that occasionally wanders into horror territory before remembering it's also supposed to be a sincere Christmas movie. And somehow that messes kind of the whole point. The opening tips you off pretty quickly to the sense of humor at play: Santa drinking, grumbling about Christmas, swearing, acting like the total opposite of the guy we all grew up with. That alone earns some laughs. Then the violence kicks in, and the film realizes there's a second joke sitting right there. Santa Claus is brutally killing people while everything around him still looks aggressively, cheerfully festive. Lights, holiday music, decorations, red and green everywhere. You can practically feel the movie enjoying the contradiction. And when the comedy's working, it's because it doesn't keep pausing to explain the joke. A criminal gets taken out in some absurd, seasonally themed way. Santa looks utterly exhausted by the whole ordeal. Someone throws out a ridiculous line, and the movie just keeps rolling. That's enough. There are comic henchmen, exaggerated rich people, a villain who literally calls himself Scrooge, and plenty of swearing. None of it's subtle, and it really shouldn't be, since a subtle version of this movie would probably be unbearable. The funniest beats usually come from twisting something familiar about Christmas just far enough to be absurd. Even the soundtrack gets in on it. There's something deeply, wonderfully stupid about a vicious fight scored to cheerful holiday music, with the tone of the score fighting directly against what's on screen, and that clash becomes part of the joke itself. But then Violent Night pulls something I wasn't quite expecting. It gets genuinely sincere, and this is where the movie's either going to win you over or lose you completely. Underneath all the swearing, gore, and cynicism, the film actually believes in Christmas. It's not just mocking the holiday. Even though the early stretch might suggest otherwise. Santa hates the whole thing, the lights tones are awful, everyone's greedy, and Christmas looks mostly like an excuse for rich people to manipulate each other while kids demand more stuff. Then Trudy enters the picture. She genuinely believes in Santa, not ironically, not as set up for another joke, and the film takes that seriously. That sincerity starts rubbing off on Santa too. And I'll admit some of it lands better than I expected. There's something kind of touching about a completely burned out Santa meeting the one kid who still sees him exactly as he's supposed to be seen. For a character who's basically lost faith in his own job, that matters. The problem is the film doesn't always know when to ease off the gas. There are moments where a small dose of warmth would be plenty, and instead it keeps pushing conversations about belief, family, and what the holiday really means start to pile up, and occasionally the story wanders into softer territory than the rest of it can comfortably support. The tonal whiplash can get pretty wild. Someone's being brutally attacked one minute, we're having a heartfelt Christmas conversation the next, then back to another kill, then a family reconciliation, then more blood. It's almost like two entirely different holiday movies are fighting for control of the same runtime, and I get why that turns some viewers off completely. If you came in wanting a hard, nasty black comedy, those sentimental detours are probably going to feel like slamming on the brakes. There are stretches that get genuinely mushy, even Hallmarkish, particularly once Trudy becomes the emotional focal point. Her innocence forces the movie to meet her on that level, and yeah, it can feel like a strange combination, Santa acting like a medieval warrior one minute, then the film wanting you emotionally invested in a family staying together the next. Still, I think stripping out that sincerity entirely would leave the movie worse off, because then what's actually left? A funny trailer concept stretched to feature-length. A Santa kills mercenaries, and doing that for nearly 2 hours with nothing underneath it eventually wears thin. The emotional material gives Santa an actual reason to keep fighting. It gives him an arc, and it gives the violence something to push against. Without the warmth, the cynicism doesn't really land either. You need to know this character once believed in Christmas for his current disillusionment to mean anything, and you need Trudy's optimism to give his exhaustion somewhere to go. So even when the sentimental scenes tip a bit too sweet for my taste, I understand why they're there. The real issue is balance, and that balance gets shakier as the film moves toward its climax. Earlier on, the comedy, action, and sincerity are constantly bouncing off each other with a real energy to the mix. Later, as the story builds toward its ending, a lot of that comedy fades, and the emotional stakes take over, which is exactly when you notice how much the humor was doing to keep everything else in check. Pull too much comedy out and the sentiment starts feeling heavier than it should. Pull too much sentiment out and the violence turns hollow. Push the violence too hard and you risk breaking the Christmas warmth entirely. That's basically the tightrope Violent Night sets for itself. Three tones that shouldn't naturally coexist, all crammed into the same movie. Does it always pull it off? No. There are definitely stretches where you can feel the gears grinding. But I'd rather watch a film wrestle with an unusual combination than play it completely safe, which is probably why its genre confusion strikes me as more interesting than frustrating. It's not really horror, too funny for that. It's not pure comedy either, rather violence carries real weight. It's not a straightforward action film, since the whole thing is built around Christmas mythology. And bizarrely, it's not even an anti-Christmas movie for all its profanity, cynicism, and gore. It's weirdly sincere about the spirit of the holiday. That might be the most surprising thing about it. Violent Night spends a lot of time poking fun at Christmas movies, borrowing from them, roughing them up a little, and somewhere along the way ends up becoming one itself, just with considerably more blood. You don't have to watch Violent Night for very long before you start clocking its influences. Die Hard is the obvious one. A wealthy family trapped in a heavily secured location, armed criminals, one unpredictable outsider gradually turning the tables on them from the inside. The film isn't exactly hiding that comparison. Then there's Home Alone, which the movie goes beyond simply referencing. At one point it basically asks outright what those traps would look like transplanted into an R-rated film, and the answer is considerably less cute than what Kevin McAllister was up to. There's a dash of Bad Santa in Harbour's burnt-out take on Saint Nick, some John Wick influence in how the action is staged, and traces of oddball Christmas movies like Gremlins, Krampus, Fatman, and the Ref floating around the edges. You could keep going. Ready or Not, The Babysitter, and even Miracle on 34th Street starts feeling weirdly relevant once the film leans into its belief in Santa material. So no, I wouldn't call Violent Night especially original in terms of structure. It knows exactly which shelf of movies it came from. The more interesting question is whether blending all those influences produces something with its own personality. And for me, sometimes it absolutely does. Die Hard, except the guy saving everyone is literally Santa Claus, is still a genuinely strong hook. and the film's at its best when it actually thinks through what that idea can do, and not just handing Santa a gun, but giving him Christmas decorations, a candy cane, a hammer, string lights, taking things that normally belong in a warm, harmless holiday setting and repurposing them as action movie tools. That's when the film stops feeling like a stack of references and starts feeling genuinely like itself. I wish it leaned into that more consistently, because whenever the Santa-specific ideas fade into the background, the rest of the movie can get surprisingly generic. The hostage plot is familiar, the dysfunctional rich family is familiar, criminals hunting for vault money is very familiar, and even some of the emotional beats head exactly where you'd expect. There's this constant tug-of-war between a genuinely fun central concept and a story skeleton that keeps leaning on things we've seen a dozen times before, which probably explains the mixed reactions to the screenplay. There are stretches where the writing is genuinely sharp and the dialogue lands, and the film's clearly aware of how ridiculous its own premise is without collapsing into full parody. There are good ideas scattered throughout, Santa not fully grasping his own magic, his violent backstory, the Christmas-themed kills, Scrooge's grudge against the holiday. All of it feels playful. But there are also scenes where the script leans hard into cliché tilde copyright or stretches an emotional exchange well past where it needs to go. Moments where you can almost feel the film thinking, okay, now we need the Christmas message, and that's when the writing turns noticeably more conventional. I also think there was room to push Santa's mythology even further. If you've already committed to the real Santa being a former warrior with unexplained magical powers, that's such a strange premise. Why not fully explore it? Instead, the film occasionally settles for dropping Santa into a fairly ordinary action sequence and trusting the costume to do the heavy lifting. Luckily, Tommy Wirkola knows exactly what to do with this kind of material. If you've seen the Dead Snow films, you already know he's comfortable mixing violence and comedy without getting self-conscious about either one. And that confidence really shows here. A movie like Violent Night could easily have turned painfully self-aware at the type where every character keeps cracking jokes about how dumb the premise is because the filmmakers are nervous the audience might laugh at the wrong moment. Wirkola mostly sidesteps that trap. He just commits, Santa's real, the violence is real, the magic is real, the absurdity is real, and the movie just goes with it. There's real energy to the direction once things get moving, especially during the action sequences as the fights are given room to breathe. You can clearly see what's happening, and the camera isn't relying on constant shaking or rapid cuts to manufacture excitement. That might sound like a small thing, but it makes a huge difference when someone gets hit. You actually see the build-up and the impact, and when a stunt happens, the film generally lets you watch it play out. That's a basic ask, but plenty of modern action movies still fumble it. The production design pulls its weight too. The lights tone estate gives the film a giant, ready-made Christmas playground, decorations everywhere, lights, ornaments, fireplaces, expensive furniture, snow outside. It looks festive enough that the violence feels even more jarring against it. And that contrast basically is the film's visual identity. Everything on screen says Christmas, and everything happening in that space says the opposite. The props matter a lot here, since so many of them end up folded into the action. A Christmas decoration can't just sit pretty in the background if Santa's going to grab it later and use it on someone. And that kind of setup makes the mansion feel less like a generic location and more like part of the joke itself. The effects mostly hold up as some of the practical work carries real weight, particularly during the nastier physical damage, though the digital effects are more of a mixed bag, with a few moments where the blood looks obviously added in post, which can be distracting given how hard the film is already leaning into the violence. Not enough to sink a scene, but noticeable. The editing gets similarly mixed results. During the stronger fights it's clean and easy to follow, but elsewhere, especially when the film seems to want to soften an impact or rush through a kill, you can feel it cutting around the violence. Some viewers won't mind if you're here for maximum gore, you might. The soundtrack, on the other hand, knows exactly what movie it's part of. Using cheerful Christmas music to score people beating each other senseless is an easy trick, but it works. A Bryan Adams Christmas Time playing under brutal action is the kind of choice that tells you Wirkola has zero interest in playing this with a straight face. Neither Slade nor Burr lives get deployed here to make the film feel restrained. The music keeps insisting this is still supposed to be festive even as someone gets absolutely demolished. That pretty much sums up the film's whole approach. Take something familiar, push it in the wrong direction, see if it turns funny. Most of the time, it does. The bigger issue is originality, because there's a real difference between being self-aware about your influences and actually escaping them, and Violent Night never quite manages the latter. Sometimes you can practically see Die Hard standing just behind the camera. Sometimes Home Alone steps directly into frame. And there are moments where it feels less like genuine inspiration and more like the film checking boxes it knows the audience will recognize. That doesn't automatically make it lazy. Other filmmakers clearly know exactly what they're borrowing, and the strongest scenes use those references as a jumping off point rather than the whole joke. The weaker scenes just remind you of better, more famous films. That's the line Violent Night is constantly walking, and weirdly, the thing that keeps it upright is Santa. Take him out and there's not much here you haven't already seen. Put David Harbour back in the suit, hand him Christmas magic, a warrior's past, and something festive to swing at people, and the film has a personality again. So no, I wouldn't call Violent Night groundbreaking. Not even close. It borrows openly, sometimes shamelessly. But when Wirkola, Harbour, and the writers stop trying to recreate the films they clearly love and start asking, okay, what would our Santa actually do here? That's when the film gets genuinely interesting. And honestly, that's the version of Violent Night I wanted a lot more of. The biggest thing holding Violent Night back, for me, is pacing. Not that the movie is boring throughout, it isn't. When Santa's actively moving through the house, fighting, improvising weapons, or just being miserable in a genuinely funny way, there's real energy to it. The problem is what happens in between. There are stretches where everything slows down for another family argument, another hostage exchange, another emotional beat, and you can feel yourself waiting to get back to the part that made this premise exciting to begin with. That's where the runtime starts to show. At around an hour and 46 minutes, it's not an absurdly long movie, but it feels longer than it is because not every section carries equal weight. A tighter cut would probably have helped, trimming some of the family material, shortening a few of the sentimental exchanges, getting back to Santa faster, because every time Harbour disappears for too long, the film loses something. That said, not everyone's going to feel this way. Plenty of viewers think the pacing works fine start to finish, and if you're enjoying the light stone family drama, the jokes, and the Christmas messaging, the slower stretches probably don't register as slow at all. But if you're mainly there for Santa turning a home invasion into a massacre, there are definitely stretches where you'll catch yourself checking how long it's been since the last real action beat. That ties into another issue. The film has a phenomenal central idea but doesn't always squeeze everything it can out of it. A violent Santa with a warrior past and genuine Christmas magic sounds like the setup for something completely unhinged, and sometimes the movie gets there, but other times it settles into being a fairly standard hostage thriller with Santa just standing in the middle of it. That's the frustrating part. You can sense the stranger, better version of this movie hiding inside the one we actually got. More Christmas-specific magic, more Santa-specific weapons, more scenarios that could only exist in this particular film would have gone a long way. Instead, a lot of the surrounding plot is familiar enough that if you removed Santa from it entirely, you'd probably guess exactly where most of it was headed. The family drama is predictable, the villains fit recognizable molds, the emotional reconciliation is easy to see coming, and the third act softens more than I expected. That's probably where the sentimentality is most noticeable. After building up such a rude, violent, cynical personality. The sudden lean into full emotional Christmas territory can feel like an awkward gear shift. Again, I don't dislike that material outright, some of it genuinely works. But there are moments where it feels like the film is scared to let its darker, meaner instincts fully win out. I think that's exactly why reactions to this movie are all over the map. A lot depends on what you thought you were walking into. If the marketing made it look like a straight-up Christmas horror movie, you might come away disappointed. It's gory, sure, and there are horror-adjacent elements, but it's much closer to action comedy than horror. And if the word violent in the title had you expecting non-stop brutality, you might also feel like the movie pulls its punches more often than expected. There are some genuinely nasty kills, no doubt, but it's not 2 hours of uninterrupted splatter. On the flip side, if you walked in expecting nothing more than dumb Santa fights criminals, the movie might genuinely surprise you. And that seems to be where a lot of the strongest positive reactions come from. People expected something disposable and instead found a film with a bit more heart, sharper action than anticipated, and a David Harbour performance that gives the whole concept real weight. That gap between expectation and reality is interesting, because this is a genuinely tricky movie to market cleanly. Is it horror? Not really. Family-friendly Christmas entertainment? Definitely not. A straight action film? Sort of. But then there's the magical Santa and sincere holiday messaging sitting right alongside it. Is it a parody? Sometimes. Is it secretly earnest? Also yes. So depending on which version of the film the trailers sold you, you could walk away either pleasantly surprised or a little annoyed. And then there's the bigger question: does this become one of those movies people revisit every Christmas? I can genuinely see it happening. There's a certain category of holiday movie that becomes an annual tradition precisely because it isn't traditional. Diehards occupy that space forever. Gremlins has its devoted crowd, Bad Santa has its own following, and Violent Night has enough personality that I could easily picture people pulling it out every December once they've had their fill of the cozier stuff. The appeal is obvious: David Harbour as Santa, ridiculous kills, Christmas music scoring brutal violence, and just enough genuine holiday spirit to keep it feeling like an actual Christmas movie rather than an action film that happened to be set in December. That combination gives it plenty of rewatch value, though I'm not fully convinced it reaches true classic status for everybody. The film has memorable moments. I'm less sure it adds up to a memorable whole, and that distinction matters. You'll remember the hammer, the candy cane, Santa drenched in blood, Harbour's performance, but large chunks of the actual plot tend to blur together, since so much of it follows beats you've seen elsewhere, which is exactly why I understand the people who file this one under one-time watch.